other day I reported the beginning of the most important race in the world, the guided missile race, to develop the first intercontinental ballistic missile, able to fire from Maine to Moscow faster than the speed of sound. The most important part of the race, of course, is between the United States and Russia, but the race has also caused a bitter battle between different branches of our own armed forces and a court-martial, perhaps rivaling the famous trial of General Billy Mitchell. I've also reported how my office obtained the secret document which figures in this court-martial, a document, though we didn't know it at the time, written by Colonel John Nickerson, one of the top officers of the Army's guided missile work at Redstone Arsenal, Huntsville, Alabama. Although the Defense Department confiscated this document when Jack Anderson of my staff showed it to them for security advice, I have now obtained another copy. And in just a minute, I want to show you certain portions and report further on the most deadly armament race in the world. Now, in the first division of work between the Army and the Air Force, the Army was given the work of developing the short-range missile, and the Air Force was given the work of developing the long-range ICBM, a guided missile geared to reach Moscow carrying a hydrogen bomb. And the Air Force has actually developed the Snark, which can fly to Moscow without any pilot and can hit directly on the target 5,000 miles away from its base in the United States. The Snark, in many respects, is an amazing weapon. It can be launched from a mere parking lot, just a plain road or a highway. All it needs is a level spot. Its launcher can be towed any place. No long, heavy-duty runways are necessary, as for giant bombers, and no complicated apparatus is used in launching our first guided missiles. The Snark requires no aerial tankers to refuel in midair, as with a B-52 or a long-range bomber. The Snark was developed by Northrop Aircraft with the cooperation of the Air Force, and as you see it in midair, one of the most fascinating things are the two skids lowered from its belly so that it can land and take another flight. The Snark doesn't have to explode on hitting the ground. It can be perfectly guided by radio back to its base. But the Snark has one great handicap. It travels slower than the speed of sound. Therefore, it could be shot down. Though it can travel 5,000 miles to Moscow, Russian planes could knock it out of the air long before it reached Moscow. So the Air Force has been working night and day on two new and highly secret long-range missiles, which will go far faster than the speed of sound. After flying some distance on this test, the Snark comes back to Earth, guided by radio from a pilot plane. It touches down on the two skids lowered from the belly, just as smoothly as a passenger plane. And as it lands, a parachute breaks out behind and brings the missile to rest, just as gentle as a baby being lowered into a cradle. The Snark is a wing missile, which the Air Force has been concentrating on for a long time. That's one reason it's slow and can be photographed in the air. The Army, meanwhile, concentrated on the much faster ballistic missile, which requires no radio guidance. It operates on the principle of a cannonball, but it has inside a gyroscope which guides it, keeps the missile straight on course until it hits. Not always exactly on the target, but close enough, considering the fact that it carries a hydrogen bomb, because an H-bomb could destroy much of Moscow even if it hit 10 miles away. The Army, using this ballistic missile, was given permission to develop the IRBM, or Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile, which flies about 1,500 miles, say a distance between England and Moscow, which is very important because we have promised our allies, the French and British, to supply them with guided missiles. So the Army with its Jupiter, the intermediate range, and the Air Force with its Thor, got into a dead heat to develop the intermediate range missile, when suddenly the Army was told to quit and go back merely to short-range missiles of 200 miles. This made the Army simply furious and caused Colonel Nickerson to write the secret memo protesting this ruling by Secretary of Defense Wilson. Now, I have here a copy of the Nickerson memo. Parts of it I shall withhold from the television screen because it might give information helpful to an enemy. But on the other hand, parts are extremely important for the public to know. The memo tells of the battle of lobbyists and a battle between giant companies. It should be noted, says this secret memo, that the aircraft industry, and particularly the Douglas Aircraft Company, openly oppose the development of any missile by a government agency. Well, that's rather important for the public to know, that the aircraft industry doesn't want the government to be in on this. High officials of the Douglas Company have stated that Douglas is paying particular attention to the possibility of killing off the operation at Huntsville, Alabama. It is expected that the Wilson Memorandum, that's Secretary Wilson's order to shut down the Army's work at Huntsville, has been heavily influenced by lobbying by this company, Douglas, and by the Bell Telephone Company. Secretary of the Air Force, of course, has been Donald Quarles, a former high official of the Bell Telephone Company. Now, I happen to think highly of Secretary Quarles and consider him to be an honest man. But even honest men do make mistakes, and the public is entitled to know both sides. The Army, in this case, thinks that Quarles sided with his own former company, Bell Telephone, and with the Air Force against the Army. Now, here's more of the secret memo. AC Spark Plug Division of General Motors has the inertial guidance responsibility for Thor. That's the Air Force missile. And of course, General Motors is Secretary Wilson's former company. Colonel Nickerson is making it very clear that he thinks Secretary Wilson is favoring his own former company, and that Secretary Quarles is favoring his own company. He goes on to say, discontinuance of Jupiter favors commercially the AC Spark Plug Division of General Motors. The Secretary of the Air Force has recommended the discontinuance in writing of the IRBM No. 2 Jupiter program at Huntsville, Alabama. The present Secretary of the Air Force, Mr. Donald Quarles, is one of the leading contenders for Secretary of Defense. Well, you can understand when you read that, why Colonel Nickerson is being court-martialed. Yet it is important for the public to know these things. Now, here is another interesting quote giving the Army's point of view. This memo says, discontinuance of the Army missile will result in the concentration of the following programs in the Bell-Douglas combination: Nike-1, Nike-B, Nike-2, IRBM, and ICBM. This is too much missile concentration in one combination. Should one add the SAGE and the Caesar programs at Bell, those are early morning warning systems that the Bell Telephone Company has, and the Navy and Air Force aircraft contracts at Douglas, the overconcentration is obviously serious. And the secret memo goes on to say, furthermore, discontinuance of the Army IRBM would result in an even greater concentration of development in Southern California. That's an area that our officials have been worried about for some time, for fear Russian bombers might come over from Siberia and smash our defense plants in the Los Angeles and other neighboring areas around there. This memo says this concentration is already the source of considerable worry from a defense standpoint. The southeastern United States, referring of course to Alabama, on the other hand, is strategically a sound location for a missile program. Well, some of these points are a bit technical. But in a minute, I'll be back with some of my own interpretations. Now, I've read you parts of this secret memo, but I've kept parts of it confidential, which I thought might be helpful to an enemy. Actually, I think the battle between private industry for the control of this ultimate weapon is not one bit exaggerated by Colonel Nickerson. This is a battle of big business and big lobbies with powerful forces lined up on both sides. On the side of the Air Force is Douglas Aircraft, which has always had a powerful inside with our top Air Force generals. On the same side is Bell Telephone, the former company of Secretary Quarles, and General Motors, the former company of Secretary Wilson. Those are not exactly pygmies of business. However, the Army has some friends, too. Chrysler, long-time rival of General Motors, manufactures the Army's Redstone missile. And here you see the noses of the Redstone being assembled in the Chrysler plant. Chrysler's also doing some research work on the Jupiter. This has put Chrysler very close to the Army, and they have strongly backed Colonel Nickerson. Then Minneapolis Honeywell is on the side of the Army. It works with Chrysler on the Jupiter. In addition, the Ford division of Sperry Rand is working with the Army. Now, these are not exactly small companies either. Both sides in this battle are scrambling for the American defense dollar and for the inside track on a weapon which may put airplanes out of business, may make land armies almost unnecessary. may make artillery look like the old-fashioned side-wheel steamboat. These are big stakes. The Air Force and the Army have their own pride and prestige, as well as the defense of the country also at stake. Secretary Wilson, Secretary Quarles may be inclined to favor their own companies, but I repeat that I consider them honest men. However, what the public wants is the defense of the United States. It wants this as cheaply as possible, but where safety is concerned, I'm convinced the American people are quite prepared to spend the necessary dollars. So here's my opinion, after studying this as a newspaper man. I believe that the American system of competition should prevail. We should have more competition in making different missiles. We should not have them concentrated either with one group of big business or in one part of the USA, such as Southern California, or with one branch of the armed services. I'll have a final word in just a minute. This race for the ultimate weapon is so important that in future telecasts I shall report on what the Navy is doing, and especially how far Russia has progressed in developing the intercontinental ballistic missile, capable of firing from Moscow to New York, Philadelphia, or Washington.